stuff. But honestly, the thing that I pride myself on is I'm honestly a servant to this ecosystem and a servant to entrepreneurs, and I leverage whatever gift, whatever thing I know to serve the entrepreneur, and that's honestly how I view it.
And you do a
But
great
for
job. McKeon, I should have said one other thing
sure,
before I pass it to you. We are recording this, okay? There's an official thing I'm supposed to say if I'm recording it, but you all have
sure,
heard it many, many times. I'm recording this. I am going to make this available to other folks. So if you don't want your face seen, uh, turn your camera off. If you don't want to be on something at all that's being recorded, drop off. I'll fill you in later. I hope you'll all stick around. Um, but that's the deal there. And with that, sorry, Nakia, back to you. Go ahead.
you're totally fine, Bob. Totally fine. Yeah. So just for context, I'll just give you a little bit about who I am and the presentation that I'm going to go through today, and just kind of set some context around that. So my name is Nakia Malicio. I work here at Georgia Tech and at ATDC with all of these folks. I am the senior deep tech startup catalyst here at ATDC. What does that mean? I focus on all technologies that are in the deep tech space, and that's everything from energy to aerospace to military tech. You name it. If it's research related, spun out of a university, I focus on it. So that means I intersect with a lot of times with DoD, NASA, Department of Energy, organizations such as that. And I'm very involved with the National Science Foundation as an instructor, as an advisor, as a commercialization expert. And so I spend a lot of time helping entrepreneurs such as yourself understand ideation and commercialization in the deep tech space. Um, and there's a couple of other programs that I do run and things that I'm responsible for at ATDC. My attempt is to leave enough time at the end to Q&A to answer questions, and also to talk about some of those programs to give you context around how you can further engage and be supported, in addition to all the wonderful support that Bob is giving you. Um, Now, I do have a couple of disclaimers when I'm presenting. I know this is actually being recorded. If you're not on mute, put yourself on mute so that we can get a good clean recording, so there's not a lot of background noise and sound, so that there could be a good recording for those who are unable to participate. If you have questions, I know every time I listen to people present, there's always these burning questions that I like to have. Please drop those questions in the chat. I certainly will leave enough time and enough room for us to be able to go through those questions, to make sure that we have the opportunity to kind of dialogue together. But what I want to talk about today is prototype to production and overcoming the challenges along the way. It will be kind of some traditional talk about prototyping and some untraditional type about prototyping. So what I'm going to talk about is an experience that I've had with working with well over 700 founders around the globe, related to building startups and how to successfully build and launch a startup. And so I'm going to walk you through a couple of examples. I'm going to walk you through a story. I'm going to walk you through some opportunities. I'm going to walk you through just to give you. I'm going to start broad, and then I'm going to kind of narrow it down to give you context. But I always like to start before we do anything with the customer first, and why the customer is so important related to that. I'm also going to make sure that I stop my video to ensure that we have a good, clean quality presentation. I don't want my internet to kind of drop out, so I want to make sure that that we're going. Everything is moving the way that it's intended to move. But I appreciate all of you for signing up here today. So when we talk about prototyping and we talk about building a company or building any kind of startup, it really starts with really understanding who and why you're building the product in the first place. And so often companies start with the product, but not starting with the customer, and never really understanding that. So when we think about the process of actually moving the technology from market to actual commercialization, that pathway is not straightforward. Path to prototyping and market commercialization, it's hard, it's murky, and quite honestly, it's a mystery. And to make jokes on it a little bit, some of you actually might find yourself in Area 51 or an alien crash site and kind of thinking about, am I building the right thing? Do people really want the product, or do really people understand it? What I typically do in this equation is really help them to understand the fundamental difference between building something and building something people want, but understanding the type of innovation before you actually begin that process. So to me, there's actually four different types of innovation that I like to kind of focus on. And when you're building any kind of technology or you're building any kind of solution, it typically falls in these four categories: sustaining, integrative, disruptive, or new market. If you're building something, you need to understand exactly who and what you're building it for and why. What already exists as opposed to what you're trying to introduce. Where is the differentiation? And then where is the evidence to support that? Where is the metrics to support why you are building what you're actually building? It's so important that you focus on that to make sure that you're building the right thing so that you understand. Whoever's not on mute, could you please put yourself on mute? Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you for that. So making sure that the types of innovation that you're building, to make sure that you're building the right product. So it's important to understand, where are you building that product? Is it sustaining? Is it integrative? Is it new market? Or is it disruptive? And I'll kind of come back, circle back around to this a little bit later. But I know all of you who build a startup, you just want to follow the traditional path that most startups, right? You go from start one to start end. I got a product, executive summary, give me the money, let's make it happen. That never really happens, right? As much as we like to lay this product out, as great as our coaches is in working with companies and helping them understand the process that you have to follow, or this ordained path, so to speak, as it means to building a product, to getting the product out there, to making sure that the customer wants it. But one of the top 10 mistakes, and the one mistake that I actually want to focus on, is that when companies are building products, the number one mistake that startups make is building something nobody wants. And I'm going to say it again: building something that nobody wants. I cannot tell you how many times I have people who sit in my office, request office hours, and they want to sell me on how great their technology is. They want to sell me how awesome what they're doing and how what they're building, and it's the next best thing. But my question is always, who wants it and why? What is so unique about what you're building, and what is so disruptive about it? What is it fundamentally changing or displacing what we're currently doing to adopt something new? The reality is that we rarely win on the first try. When you first build something or launch a product, it very rarely solves or wins that first time out the gate. It is an iterative process. But in context of why it's an iterative process, you have to move through with this thing called understanding the customer. This is just a quick snapshot, a landscape that I actually walk through clients with, or walk through some of our startups with. When we begin the process of, how well do you understand the problem enough before you begin the process of building or designing something? So it starts with an in-depth understanding of the customer segment. And when I say customer segment, it's not necessarily an industry, or who are you selling to, Delta, or I'm selling to Home Depot. It's not so much that. It's so much a customer has a problem and you're trying to sell to that particular person. And that person has a specific job that they need to get done. And there's a problem with preventing them from being able to do that specific job. Then you have to understand, what are the triggers and the mechanisms that they go through to uncover why they're unable to do the job. Then what is the manifestation of them not being able to fulfill the job that they created, right? And I think you kind of get the picture here. So what I want to walk you through is understanding the customer first before you start the design or the prototyping process. And why is that so important? And as I unpack that through this presentation, you'll begin to understand why. So some of my hope with some of the things that I want you to kind of walk away is understanding how to truly leverage prototypes from these learnings. And what does that look like? What you will learn is what and when to prototype, the different variations, understanding the techniques behind that and why it's so important, and then understanding, what do you do with the information that you find, and why is it so important that you understand this process, and understand it in such a way to make sure that you're building something that differentiates you from what already exists in the market. There's this thing that we like to call, it's called the technology readiness levels. It's so important. It is a mechanism or a pathway to really help us to gauge where the technology starts to where the technology will end up and the pathway it passed through before you actually get to deployment. There's so many different steps. When we think about innovation, and each stage in the innovation process requires a process, investment and resources and buy-in. So it's not just to say, okay, you and your team, you have the ability to build something, but do you understand all the perspectives, the customers, the ecosystem in which the technology you're building for will actually make a difference? And so understanding your technology readiness level and understanding the maturity of your technology and where it is to where it needs to be is so important before you begin the design process. But it starts with understanding the customer. And then once you understand the technology readiness level, then it's getting to a place of understanding, if you're building physical products, understanding the manufacturing readiness level of your technology. And I'm not going to go too in depth in this. It's just to give you highlights to set context. Hopefully enough context that will drive you back to us so we can walk through a coaching plan or a supportive process to give you in-depth understanding on what that actually looks like before you actually begin the process of building something. But it starts again with understanding, who are you designing it for? Who are the users and what is the use case? And then what is the programmatic part of it? How do you begin the process of implementing what you're designing to build? What does the cost looks like? What does all of that look like before you actually build a physical product? Who is the customer and who is the end user, and why are they the end user? What was specific about your customer discovery that said, hey, this is what we need to design because there is something we need to fix or do better? And what does better mean in context of the customer you're trying to solve the problem for? So if you just take, for instance, if you got someone that a customer may be, a war fighter or a soldier, and you've got some new drone technology that wants to improve communications or help improve communications to the drone and make sure that the warfighter has the ability to make better and more efficient decisions. What is a metric that matters? Who was the user? Who was the use case? And who was involved in driving this, right? So when you take this zeroed out battlefield perspective, and the objective is you've got robots and drones communicating to provide intelligent data to the warfighter on the ground to make intelligent battle decisions. So when we talk about understanding the customer and understanding the user in such a way, before you begin the process of building and designing anything, it's important to understand who uses it and why is there a benefit for that. So customers, why people buy is important to understand. It's important to understand who the customer is. People don't buy because they understand what you do. People buy because you understand what they do, how they think, how they communicate, their pain and their motivation, and what they specifically need, and the focus on that. So before you move through the prototyping process, which we'll get to, but I want to set the stage on context of why and who you're building for and understanding the customer. Your job is not to validate your product, it's to validate the problem and who has it, and then how best to actually solve it. When we think of prototypes and MVPs are tools to help you test a hypothesis. It helps you to test whether or not your thing or your solution solves this big burning need or big problem that a customer has. And how do you best go about that process? So a couple of fundamental questions to start to begin to ask yourself is how well do you know the customer's job, their pains, and their gains? What is it that they need done? Is it something technical? Is it a piece of software? If so, how well do you understand the workflow of their job to know how to specifically design or build something that meets their specific need? But I know all of you are probably sitting there, but what about my technology? I know it's great. I'm super smart. We built it. We spent all this money. We raised all this money. Haven't found a customer yet, but we built this technology. What about my customer? It's not about that. The reality of it is what is your compelling story that makes your customers want to break the status quo and do more work and implement your solution? You're asking them to fundamentally displace something that they're currently doing to adopt something that you want them to adopt because you believe that what you're building works best than what they're currently doing. So the myth again is customers want your technology. Customers actually want their jobs done, their pains addressed, and their pains killed, and their dreams achieved. As we begin the process of developing, and as most of you probably are at this place, what we call problem solution fit, where you've reasonably attached a customer segment to a problem and a pain, that you've got reasonable enough understanding to be able to move from a place of problem solution fit to identifying a customer segment and the value that you're actually going to deliver them. But what I want to employ you or encourage you to be able to do is really step back again and be able to, can you identify a problem enough that people care about with an intensity large enough to motivate them to action? So when we think about an adoption criteria of a particular product or a technology, is how much better do you need to be before your customer adopts you? What is a metric that matters, and what is a metric that is different for your customers to adopt you? So there's a process between understanding, building, moving, and deploying. And finding out where you are will make all the difference in the world, from ideal to growth to scale. And then once you identify that customer and identify the problem enough, then you're reasonably enough to say we're at a place called product market fit. Now, product market fit is where we use this thing called the business model canvas that helps us to identify a simplified process outside of a business plan to help us simplify who we're delivering value to and why. Now, I know we're talking about prototyping, and we'll get to that point, but it's a moot point to talk about prototyping without talking about who you're building it for first, or having an in-depth understanding of the customer and why you are building for that particular customer and what are that customer want to be solved. So the challenge before you build anything is the question is can you design a product or a process that delivers value in a way that your customers want to consume it? I'll read that again. Can you design a product or a process that delivers value in a way that your customers want to consume it? So before you begin to say, I built something without customer feedback or understanding where customers actually sit or fit into this equation, it's a moot point again to try to build something without an in-depth understanding of that. So this is what we get to this place where all of you fundamentally want to be. You want to be at a business model fit because that's where everything is clicking. You've got the product, you understand the customers, everything is moving and clicking and flowing on the exact page that you intended it to focus, right? So when we talk about building something and building a business that people care about, the question again is can you build a sustainable, repeatable business selling your product or process to your customers? That happens when we talk about in-depth understanding of who the customer is and why they are your physical customers. So when we talk about moving from product solution fit to product market fit to business model fit, this is where all of the cylinders click. So when we talk about those hyper growth businesses that get the crazy valuations, that raise a lot of money, that end up exiting to billions of dollars because they got this fundamental thing down pat. A process of understanding the customer first, then building the solution, iterating, then creating, and then moving from a process from customer discovery to building an actual product, but using insights from that. So what I want to do is I want to walk you through a case example before we actually start to jump into the prototyping part of the presentation. But hopefully this will give you context of the importance of why you should actually do customer discovery first, understand the problem well enough before you begin the design, prototyping, building process. Because I think once you move through that first, then you know why and who and what you're building for that person. So let's talk about I-Core Team 1656, case study, Team Bioprocess Optimizers, a journey of Anna, Esther, and myself. This is a Georgia Tech team. This became an actual physical company. And we started off down the same process that we're asking you to start off with. We started out with a hypothesis, with a customer segment, and what was the value that they were getting from us. So our process was, we started out with a hypothesis called help upstream process engineers design media composition and feeding strategies to increase productivity by 50%. So the customer segment was upstream process engineers. The thing that they were going to use our technology was the design composition meeting feeding strategies. And the value that they were going to get was increased productivity by 50%. But we just didn't jump out there and say, okay, let's start to build a business because we know that now we got an in-depth understanding on who the customer is. We had to understand the ecosystem first. Where does the technology or the product or the service that we're thinking about building fit? And where and why does it fit in there? Then we had to sub-segment or segment on what was our particular areas of focus: therapeutic biologics, veterinary vaccine, gene therapies, biomolecules for research, cell therapies, academic institutions, and tissue engineers. That was the segment. So it was not enough just to stop there, because each of these segments had a specific job or workflow that they did. So we had to understand what was the workflow of each of these particular segments. So drug delivery, cell line development, process development, tech transfer, FDA approval, then commercialization. So we had to understand the workflow, but we didn't just stop there. We also had to understand what was the specific needs and pains that each of these workflow correlated back to these segments were having. And the thing that you see here, while you'll get to the technology, what we actually built, the thing that we actually built and then what we heard the pain was two different things. This is why customer discovery is so important, because no matter how in-depth and super smart and complicated our technology was, the thing that they cared about the most for their pains, their needs and pains, was quality, yield, time, labor, resources, purity, capital costs. They were things that we thought were fundamentally different than what we actually thought that they cared about. Now, while they wanted to use our solution, they still had to understand what the problems and the pains were. So we started out with our business model canvas. If you're not using it, I strongly encourage you to use it. I strongly encourage you to sign up for our customer discovery classes so that we can walk you through an in-depth process to unpack the customer's problem and need, to know exactly what you're building and designing and for whom and why you're building it. Our customer segments we started out with was upstream process engineers, downstream process engineers, head of process development. We made some assumptions around what we assumed their value proposition was because we didn't know. We understood the role, but we had to talk to them to really understand and further clarify what we thought that their process was and who that they thought their process is. So that meant we actually had to go talk to people. That we actually did a total of 242 interviews. Our team traveled around the country. Our team even actually went to Switzerland to talk to customers in the biomanufacturing and cell manufacturing space. We wanted to understand in depth what not only was happening in the lab, but we wanted to understand from the customer's perspective, what are you seeing and thinking related around the problem that we perceive you are trying to solve? That's where it starts. So everyone has to have a start process before they actually begin to build something. So once again, I'm setting context because we're shortly about to jump into prototypes and how they reduce risk in design. But I want to start with the customer again to get it in your head how important it is to understand what you're building and designing and for whom and why. So we started out with the research, obviously, we then translated into the idea. Then we moved into the customer discovery process. Then, which after the customer discovery process, we were able to distill the information. Then it allowed us to move through a process called customer validation. Then after we validated the customer, then we were able to move into customer creation. And then from the path of customer creation to ultimately building a company. But it just didn't start with, we had an idea, we made some assumptions, we knew what we actually wanted to build, and then we moved to that actual process. So what we actually fundamentally built, I'll tell you in a second, but I want to point out something here. It's important and why you should talk to customer discovery, because we were creating a product that sat inside an ecosystem. And while all of them saw the same fundamental value, but they all looked at the problem very different. They all touched the same problem, but they all viewed the problem very differently. And this is why building something and assessing the right value to whom and why is so important. You cannot access right value to who and to why without understanding the underlying motivation in the job. So if we focused on talking to cell lines and what they said they wanted quality, if we talked to people in clean meat and gene therapy, they said they wanted purity and cell numbers. If we talked to the CDMO, the tech transfer folks, they wanted a simple tech transfer process. If we talked to entrepreneurs, they wanted productivity, faster culture. If we talked to academics, they wanted cell viability and cost reduction. So the product that we actually built was a computational mathematical model, which you see here. And that computational mathematical model was powered by AI. And what this model does, it's media, and to give context around what media is the thing that the cells eat. And when cells eat, they grow. When they grow, they expand. When they expand, that means to biopharma or therapeutic or drug companies, means they get more drugs. Cell viability and qualities of cells are not sustainable. They die off really, really quick. So finding the right mixture of food for those particular cells so that they can survive is so important. So our computational mathematical model predicted what is the best feeding strategy depending on the cell line that they were working with, which will determine what is the right feeding models for those cells. But not talking to the customers first to understand from their perspective what is the challenges that they're having, we would have never known what that magical number was. Remember, our hypothesis before we built any technology was to help upstream process engineers to design media composition feeding strategies to increase productivity by 50%. More cells, more drugs, more money, which means more product. Everybody's a happy camper. So as I move into the process of prototype, reduce risk in design, I hope you understand the importance of why we fundamentally design and talk to customers first before we begin the process of building anything. I cannot stress that enough. It will save yourself time, resources, and money before we actually start the process of building anything. So making sure that you understand that. As we move through the process, there's simply high level types of prototypes and there's low level. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to start off into this great big grandiose thing, right? And what I mean by that is it could start off as something as a PowerPoint sketch, right? Just kind of low barrier to entry prototype, just kind of outlining, within a PowerPoint, here's what we think this will actually do, what it will actually look like. Then you can kind of move into some 2D paper prototypes to kind of outline some things. It's real simple, but we'll kind of unpack that. Just wanted to just start off because I know some of you are like, well, what is a prototype? Some of you have questions around it. Some of you already may know what a prototype is, and what is the purpose or the reason behind it. Then you have high level and depth 3D paper prototypes, right? I always encourage you to start off with the very low level aspect before you design to build. Take some of the user feedback that you get from your customers to really understand before you move into an actual design process, because it will help you to understand what you're building and to whom, why you're building it for. So when we think of the different types of prototypes, right? There's sketches and designs, there's 3D printing or rapid models, there's physical models, wireframes, role play through virtual or augmented realities. There's feasibility or adaptive. There's working models, video prototypes, simulations. Horizontal from the user view, vertical backend, often database design. There's multiple levels of types of prototypes. Where you fit in, I want to be broad here because all of you have different technologies and different customers, and so you're going to have to go talk and validate this. But when we think about the process of that, it's important to understand what process works best for you and why does this process work best for you? What is the metric that matters and how do you begin the process of uncovering that? Some of you maybe have something as simple as an app that interfaces with a particular user and you want to understand the UI UX and how they're engaging with current apps or new apps. And then some of you may in depth in something very like dealing with Department of Defense or warfighter or telecommunications, where there's a lot of complexity with design because now you're integrating into already existing structures or models. And you want to make sure that what you're designing and building fundamentally delivers value and does not take away from the value that you're actually creating. So when we talk about what will actually what I encourage you often to do is learn fast, fail often, improve the outcomes. You do that by being able to just understand what you're building, going through have under certain circumstances, understand the complexity of it, making sure that you're adding value to the right particular thing. What is the speed and the simplicity of what you're trying to do? Focus on the solutions, build the prototypes that are designed to solve specific problems, but remain open to other lessons and insights that it may bring, right? So you may hear something from the user that says, yeah, while we love and endure this particular solution, if it does this better, then we will actually adopt it. And so it circles back again to just making sure that you talk to users. So the point that I'm trying to make is not all users are created equal. So you need to understand, look for the biases, understand their experiences, leverage what is best, understand between the customer what they want, what they desire, where are the gaps and the holes, how are they augmenting? Because I can tell you this, customers always augment products to help them solve problems and pain. To give you an example, prior to COVID, I used to travel a lot. And in my hotels, the question was always, where am I going to find something to eat? Where am I going to eat? How am I going to go through this? And I would always find myself either those outdated menus that they leave in the hotel, or you have to call down the desk and ask. And I was like, okay, there's got to be a more simplified way. Now, I was using the Uber Eats app. Now, the Uber Eats app was designed for them to go get the food, bring it to me. But I found it was a great quick search engine tool to tell me what was within a walking distance. If I ordered something, I could just go walk and get it. It gave me perspective, or, making sure that, I try to stick to a reasonably healthy diet. So I wanted to make sure that I could find all the things in the areas that I was particularly looking for. So now I know Uber Eats didn't intend for that app to be used in that capacity, but I augmented it because it helped me solve a short-term problem that I have. So that's why I say not all users are created equal. So you have to make sure that you're talking to your customers to understand what they need, how are they using, where are the biases related to that. Now, I know depending on the complexity of your customers, it can be very simple. Like I said, B2B, B2C, talk to people on the street, or it can be complicated. So if you're trying to handle complicated situations or conversations, or you've got a technology that will intersect with someone that requires high levels of security, secrecy, or privacy, think about how you will begin the process. How you begin the process of uncovering, how will you handle sensitive conversations, right? Know what drives classification, focus on the problem space, reconsider the context. And I'm giving this in because I don't know, some of you may end up have a government as a customer, may not, or some of you may be dealing with some company's high level of security information, or you may be building a solution or software. Find mechanisms to really, because that may be crucial for you in the build and the design. So find a mechanism to be able to address that, extract that, but also stay in line with the particular problem, right? So experts probe. What is the thing that you're trying to tease out, right? Understand the cognitive analysis of that particular job, right? What does the past and future look like? The big picture. What are they noticing, right? What are you trying to understand related around that particular customer? Because if you don't understand this, what will fundamentally happen is you'll think the customer wants a drill, but they don't want a drill. What they actually want is a 1/4 inch hole. So you got to understand what you're actually building and who are you building it for, right? So when we think about the process of distilling that, we have to yet again understand that if you focus on the technology, then you'll be trying to sell the drill. But what the end user actually wants, again, is just a 1/4 inch hole. Now, you need to determine how big of a hole they want, how many holes do they want. Those are the things that fundamentally matter. So you have to understand, what is the metric that you use, or how do you begin the process of unpacking a metric for a particular customer? And there's several methods that you can actually use to begin to distill your data, to distill your information, that you could use. There's critical technical parameters, there's key performance parameters, there's measurements of effectiveness, there's measurements of stability, measurements of performance, key system attributes, critical operation issues. These are things that and some of you, that if you're building software, or you're building a hard piece of hardware that may integrate with a particular system, you got to have a metric, because your customer cares about something. They have a problem, they have a value that they're looking for, but you got to make sure that you build in the mechanisms to kind of help them with that, right? So slow it down for a second. How do you begin the process to prioritize features and functions for your product? As you begin to take the information that you learn about your customers, to begin to distill that information, it's important that you move through this process that really helps you to understand who the customer is, why you're building for that customer, and then what does that particular process looks like. So there's a couple of feature prioritization models that you can actually begin to think about and use. There's the enough test, there's the Kano model, the Moscow model, the Rice model, and the feature screening. All of these fundamental things help you to prioritize and use information in a way that helps you to distill the information. For instance, like we take the enough test, right? Technicals for early prioritization to evaluate whether an idea would be effective in practice. The ideal are rated from 1 to 10 scale of for newness, usefulness, feasibility, and can be used in later stage too, right? So it's you got to have a mechanism that you put in place to make sure that you're gauging against what your customers wanting and using and needing and whether or not it's actually working, right? Then you have the Moscow model, right? Must have, should have, could have, and won't have. We use this in the iCore program a lot, right? Is it did the customers say it's a nice to have, or is it a must have, or they just likely just don't care, right? You need to have a mechanism to gauge whether or not the customer cares about what you're trying to build and see whether or not it's a must have or a nice to have, because that will be all the intent in the world, whether your solution actually gets adopted. Then you have the Kano model, right? The model, the more the time you spend investing resources, time, money, effort to create and innovate, improve the feature in each of those buckets, the higher level the customer satisfaction will be, right? So basic features, performance features, delighters, or excitement features, right? So understanding where they are. And I think this model is more around using this one is more around once you've actually kind of got a more advanced prototype or an MVP where you're looking for some extreme feedback and how you actually begin to take that, right? Or it can be something simple as summarizing a location analysis, right? Is it positive versus negative, intriguing versus concerning, right? And you can ask questions around that to kind of begin the process of assessing value. Or you can use reevaluating needs at the point at the new pilot location, right? If you've got a pilot going, how's the mechanisms that where you determine whether or not the thing is useful, not useful? How do you backtrack and understand those particular methods, or using some type of feature screening metric, to determine where a product is as opposed to where it's not? How doubtful is this thing going to be implemented? Is there some actual cost that will be associated around that? And then, of course, the RICE framework, right? Reach times impact times confidence effort equals a RICE score, right? So it's really just kind of giving a good understanding. This is really good for like if you're a good framework for testing apps and testing around effort levels and just seeing where that process is and seeing if customers really are chiming in or feeling your product. And you don't have to use any of these, but I would encourage you to use some method, whether it's an Excel sheet and tracking, yes, this customer said they liked it and why they didn't like it, or give it some type of system score, because that's going to be important when you think about the design and the iterative process as you move forward. And once again, I said there's types of innovation impacts how you interpret feedback, right? And that feedback, as I said in the beginning, in the sustainable, disruptive, incremental, or radical, every one of you falls somewhere in this innovation process. And if you're building something that's sustaining, if there's an additional product that's already in the market where you're positioning, or something that's disruptive, if you're doing something that's disruptive, you're displacing something that exists. You got to make sure that you have the metrics that matter and making sure that you're building the right thing and that it lines up to what your customers want and what your customers actually sees. Because if you don't, what you'll do is you'll find yourself in a position to where you will miss what you're actually trying to do. Because the ultimate goal is obviously is to build a minimal viable product, or I like to call it a minimal remarkable product, a product that people care about with an intensity that they actually want to buy it and they actually want to move. But don't be afraid to learn and pivot when necessary, especially if you're building something or you get customer feedback that it doesn't actually matter. They don't actually care about that, but have a metric for that, right? So when we talk about being able to pivot, you got to consider, every aspect in the dynamic changes, right? And why it changes. So we have to think in context of desirability, viability, and feasibility. It starts off with the viability aspect of you doing your customer discovery around your business model, your lean canvas, whatever business model you want to use. and just really understanding, the job to be done, using a process to really uncover the customer process and the development, and then the lean process, right? How do you begin to implement all of the things that you're thinking about? There has to be an iterative process. You have to have a tool, some mechanism when you think about the actual building and build out of your tool, your technology, and your solution. So when we think about some of the innovation rules of the road, right? Number one, continuous decision making. It's always going to be crucial. Prioritization, efficiency. What do you need to know next? Learn early, fail cheaply. And I will say that again: learn early and fail cheaply. Appropriately ask radical, disruptive dilemma. Ask questions that are disruptive. MVP to reduce risk and costs, because we want to make sure that as you move to marketing, you're building the right thing. We want to make sure that you're considering all the costs that are associated around that, and the things that you need to kind of actually begin the process and digest, right? Leverage your tools. Innovation, whether it's, some prototyping tool, whatever, your canvas, your chart, or whatever it is that you need to do, right? Project ecosystem, keep abreast, know what's going on in your ecosystem. Everything can pivot, right? It doesn't always have to remain the same. Figure out where you need to move, where you need to change, and what's dynamically changing within the world, right? Where do you need to fit in, right? Dismantling, rebuild, reuse assets. Figure out where you are and where you need to be. It's so important. And balance out the prioritization, and your MVP as to where you are to where you need to be, right? Build some type of prioritization framework. It's so important. And I like to say this, right? Only the paranoid survive. Questions, listens, consider every day. Constantly listening to the customer, constantly listening to what they're saying, so that you can move through a process to get them to a place of understanding, so that you can make sense, right? So when we ultimately zero out to the design process, it really comes down to this, right? Remember, iterate, prioritize, MVP, pivot, lean innovation. It's a process. So when you think about understanding the customer, understanding the problem, it really boils down to a little bit of design thinking, the job to be done, the lean startup, and an agile method. So it's a problem, understanding the problem before you can, and then have the learning, then before you can actually move to the place of execution. You cannot do one without the other. I will say it again. If you do not understand your customer and what you're specifically building for and why you're building your particular product, you will completely misunderstand and misinterpret what is actually needs to happen. So when we think about some common definitions that we hear all the time that are always loosely misused: iterating and prioritization and MVP and pivoting and persevering, people always misunderstand what these particular things are and what they particularly mean. So when I think about persevering, right, it's you measure, learn, build, right? Simple. Measure, learn, build. That's how you move from one product to the next. And that may look different from product to product, right? But having some sketch of where you are to where you want to be, from the iteration process to the ideal, to the concept validation, to the refinement, to the actual usability when the customer is actually using it. That's a process that you have to spin down, right? And sometimes you may have to go back to a customer and say, let me observe your job. Let me physically see what you're doing before I actually begin the process of implementing something. Let me see what you're thinking about, how you're doing your job. And then if I need to, yes, then I'll pivot from that, because our team will come back and we'll go through the information again to make sure that we're building the right thing, that we're on track with that. And once again, considering the innovation rules again. And yes, I duplicated it again because it's important that you understand it. However, I will not read them again. But as I'm coming close to a close here, I just want to still leave you with a couple of thoughts, right? When we begin to think about innovation, it is a persistent process, right? Always seeking improvement, continue to ask questions and assumptions, ask, listen, consider, engage your stakeholder throughout the ideas and needs and change and evolve. And then I love what Dyson says, like everyone we get frustrated by products that don't work properly. As design engineers, we do something about it. We're all about invention and improvement. listening to the customer. And that's why I said this was going to be a little different than your traditional talk on prototyping. Wanted to give you some context around it, but I think the strength of prototyping is honestly understanding the customer. I encourage you to spend time, find a mechanism that works for you, that works for your team, that works for your company to make sure you are in fact building the right thing. Nobody wants a product that you haven't considered how they're going to use it, how they're going to implement it. I promise you, you will be so wildly successful when you build the right thing. Remember, the number one reason startups fail is because they build something nobody wants. So thank you for listening. And now let's have a discussion.
All right, folks, if you have questions, start by placing them in the chat window, and then we'll pull from there, but we'll also just jump on and bring in your questions. We'll get every question. Also, this is by no means the only event of Prototype March, so I will be sending this entire everybody who is attending here will receive a schedule of additional events from me later today. Bear with us on a couple of things. As I told folks on the information session earlier this week, we are doing a prototype of how to do Prototype March. So I'm learning as I'm going along, and I've made some changes to the schedule based on some feedback I've gotten. And also, we are in the midst of changing our data system at ATDC, so the calendar items are a little bit slow, so bear with us, but we will have lots of information out to you. So with that, questions for Nakia? Feel free to unmute.
Someone said, how long did the customer discovery portion take for you and your co-founders? Yeah, so that process, when we did the program, it was 7 weeks that we went through customer discovery, and it was an additional 4 weeks after we further validated our value proposition. And we also, during customer discovery, realized that we needed a partner as well. And also, not only did we realize we needed a partner, we also realized that we needed we intersected with FDA a little bit. I mean, FDA a little bit, because our tool was kind of being used as a clinical decision support tool. So we also needed to consider FDA in that regulation part before we actually started to build. So it was helpful for us to do customer discovery, because now we not only stood what we needed to talk to, what we were building, but now we understood from all the players before we actually deployed a product.
And I want to just add on to that, I'm a very big believer that customer discovery never actually ends.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Companies where it has actually ended are companies like Kodak and Blockbuster and buggy whip companies and that kind of thing.
Right.
Other questions, folks?
What is the best way to approach government entities for customer discovery process? Yeah, that is a good question, right? I mean, it depends on what agency. Some agencies are extremely open, and then some agencies are extremely closed, right? Like, for instance, like, I know if you are building something like Department of Defense, for instance, I'll just use them as an example because, I do a lot with them, right? So the Department of Defense is, you don't kind of tell them, hey, this is what I built, and will you buy it? Department of Defense is like, here's what our needs are, and can you build to that, right? And so they're very directive and very specific as to what they want and need. So really understanding, whether it be a program officer, whether it be, a procurement buying agent, understanding who uses it. But, government can be somewhat of a complicated system sometimes. There is a system called the Federal Procurement Database System. It operates much like a Google search engine. If you type in what your technology service is, it'll tell you what federal agency is buying your technology. And what it will list is, it will list the program officer, the contracting officer, who bought it, who approved the decision, who currently has the contract. That's a great place to start, and building out your forecast pipeline around Because it's, it's like, again, it's much like a healthcare system, right? You've got an obvious end user beneficiary, us like a patient, but then there's multiple stakeholders along that journey. So I would map out the agency, their priorities, and who you begin the process of engaging. So those are some of the ways that you can do customer discovery. And we've done customer discovery in the government space, or finding a sponsor within the government, someone that is trusted, that can make those soft introductions for you, is another way as well.
Question from Dove Jacobson, who's actually in the room here with me at Curiosity Lab, which is a fantastic place, by the way.
Yep, yep.
Hello there. I'm on there, so go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, okay. You want to just, Naki, you want to just read it? His mic's off here so we don't
turn it on,
blast each other out.
No, go ahead. I know, Dove. Go ahead, Dove.
Can you hear me?
Yep, I can.
Okay, I guess I was trying to keep track of all those, I don't know what you call them, assessment models or,
Yeah, so there are feature prioritization models.
yeah, I mean, any one of them looked great. Like, you
Right.
know, and any one of them looked like a ton of work to understand and then to actually implement. But it looked like you have assigned us to learn them all and then decide which is the best one or ignore it all because it's too much stress.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, no, so I mean, for instance, like your question in here, you can use any one or all, it's your choice, but the point is that to have some mechanism and where you determine, like the Moscow one, right? I love the fact that it's simple: must have, should have, could have, won't have, right? Keep it simplified because it's something that you can ask in an interview, right? And if you're doing something that's engineering related, software related, like for instance, if you've got some new propulsion system and you're talking to an engineer and you're talking about you're delivering payload into space or something, and you want to know how much fuel versus payload versus what is the percentage of fuel that they need to hit escape velocity, then obviously you're going to use something that's going to be a little bit more metric based to kind of tease that out, right? But if it's something really simple, like you're using one app versus this app, maybe like that must have, nice have, that Moscow one is perfectly fine. It's just really going to depend on you, your customer, your product, to really understand what you're specifically doing. Will kind of help you to unpack that. These are all just opinions, perceptions, examples. You can find out what works best for you, or just even spend time in a coaching session and just kind of help you think through your ideation and commercialization model, which is something I spend a lot of time too, especially in working with researchers. It's like there is, or we call it research translation or translation, right? Of here's what you did in the lab. How do we translate that to market, right? Where does the customer say they think or feel about it? So that's one particular way that we can kind of look at that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Other questions?
I have a question. My name is Marshall Shoemaker. So what is the most common software tool you see people using to do wireframes, workflows, and user interfaces?
Yeah. Oh God. So there's one called Mock Flow, is one. Proteo.io. Let me see here. I can find them for you and drop them here in the chat.
Thank you.
Yep, I sure can do that. Yeah, so Mockflow is one, Proteo.io. These are two really powerful ones to use. Let me drop the other one in here. Proteo.
So I have a second question. So I've already done the customer discovery process. I want to show the prototype, which I have worked up in some other tools, to potential technical partners and to potential investors. I really don't want it to get distributed.
Sure.
Are most people showing them like in video conferencing, or some people even putting them on websites with passwords, or how are people doing that?
Yeah, so it depends on what you're doing. Like for instance, sometimes if I know I'm building something or using something that's proprietary, I will lock it in a PDF and prevent them from copying the PDF or distributing the PDF or printing the PDF. You could password protect it that way, or or if you're, got a PowerPoint that you're using some very low level explanation that gives them a reasonable understanding where you're using animation to kind of describe that, that can be a way that you can do that. If you're more advanced, it's hard if you're got like source code or something, if you're using like GitHub or TensorFlow or something like that, where you've got like some code out there, where you're using some kind of open source. But there's ways to kind of protect that kind of stuff too. But yeah, it just depends. You got to reasonably, have some level of comfort for people to be able to share. But also you got to, in a sense that, you don't want to give away all of your, your proprietary process as well too. If you're doing like, if you're building like, if you're doing app development or building APIs, I know Postman is a great way to kind of create user validations around API development and API integrations. If that's something that you want to use, let me see if I'll drop that in the chat as well, which is a great tool for API development, enterprise level. If you're developing software that's going to be used at an enterprise level, and you can kind of create a test box repository for people to kind of test in and test your product without necessarily having to see your code and all of that. So I dropped that in the chat as well. Postman for those who develop and all of that. It's a great tool. Like I said, it gives you everything right there. All your API tools, your API repositories, your own personal workspace, and then your intelligence as well. So it's a great place to test out your code, test out your APIs, and can create a sandbox for people to kind of play in and test your software and test your tools out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right. If we still have time, there's a very good question from Dollaro Berkeley in the window there.
All right. How do you know when you have done enough customer discovery to start prototyping? Do you? Yeah. So my first question is, customer discovery never stops. It's always an iterative process, right? Because your customer, they change, products change, right? One thing I will say this is stay away from feature traps. I see so many startups get caught up in the feature loop, and they get so caught up there till they never build anything that has any value to it. And then as soon as the next greatest thing comes out, the customer's off to the next greatest thing, right? So make sure that you're building, that you have a reasonable enough data set around your customer discovery that without a shadow of a doubt that you are delivering value to these customers in such a way that leaving you is a moot point, right? So to your question is that do you have enough data sets? There should be enough patterns within that customer segment to say, okay, I've got 1,000 people that said this, right? In our case, we had 242 upstream process engineers said that I need 50% increased productivity. We knew that was a reasonable enough data set to say we can now begin to build something. We knew that there would be more iterations, but we knew without the shadow of a doubt we had enough low level to move into building something because we had a reasonable enough customer understanding from before we actually moved on.
Okay, and if we still got time, any local aerosol manufacturer suggestions? And I'll put that out to everybody.
Yeah, so my suggestion around that, I don't know any aerosol manufacturers, but I will say this: if you get an opportunity, I can make an introduction to our Georgia MEP. They're in that manufacturing space, and they have great resources with other manufacturers. Or if you've got your own chemical, my question would be your own proprietary chemical. Have you met with a formalist to see whether or not, is your chemical ready for mass production and mass scale? And what does that scale up process look like for you and being able to launch that particular product? But yeah, taking advantage of MEP, our manufacturing resource and extension, would probably be a great resource for you. And I can make connections to that, or Bob for that matter as well too, can make connections to our MEP manufacturing extension.
All right. Let's see. So if there are other well, first, Nakia, if you have to go, I understand. If there are other questions, you can get those to me and I'll pass them on to Nakia. I will stick around for a few minutes to talk about, with anybody who wants to stay, to talk about Prototype Month. And then you can all expect to see some emails from me over the next few days. So, and Nakia, that was, I expected fantastic, but that was even better than what I expected. So thank you, huge thank you.
You're so welcome. You're so welcome. And I got 2 more minutes if anybody has any additional questions. If not, I'll drop off. But yeah, it was awesome. Thank you. And join ATDC if you're not. Get involved, and we're all here to help and
Yes.
support you all.
And my email address, by the way, is now in the chat window. Thank you. Thank you, Chandler. All right, folks.
All right. Thank
All
you
right,
all.
I am going to stop recording, and then for anybody who's on, I'll be here to discuss the prototype month.